Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Rawkode Live. I am your host, Rawkode. Today, we're going to take a look at my favorite SaaS and open source integration framework, Pipedream. But before we do that, I need to say thank you to my employer, Equinix Metal. Equinix Metal is a bare metal cloud, and they give me the time and the resources to invest in this show and produce content so that we can all learn together. If you want to check out Equinix Metal, you can visit metal.equinix.com and you can use the code rawcode-live. This will give you $50 in credit. Now, $50 can get you around 100 hours of compute on our smallest instance, but it's much more fun to get the bigger instances and spend it a little bit quicker. So check it out and let me know how you get on. Now, today I am joined by the co-founder and engineer at Pipedream, Dylan Sather. Hey, how are you, Dylan?
Good. Thank you for having me, David.
No, it's my pleasure. It's not hyperbole when I say that this is my favorite SaaS product, and I'm really looking forward to showing people it today.
Awesome.
Do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction, and then we'll kind of talk about Pipedream after that?
Sure. So I am one of 8 co-founders at Pipedream. I'll go into a little bit of our team history in a moment, but we've worked together for about 10 years as a team. We founded Pipedream just a couple of years ago and then launched Pipedream in October of 2019 officially. I've done a little bit of engineering, data science, teaching in my career, but I really love, right now I do a lot of developer advocacy work for Pipedream, and so happy to share it with everyone and really excited to show it off.
Awesome. Do you have a few slides, I believe, that we're going to run through?
Yes.
We could talk about Pipedream first if you want, or we can do the slides and then we'll have a little bit of a chat. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'll give the 10,000 foot view first. The slides kind of cover, really the high level of what Pipedream is, how people use it. I think that'll set the stage for the rest of the conversation. So can you see the presentation and present mode okay?
I can, looks great.
Great, okay. So I briefly went over this. My technical title at Pipedream is a product hacker. That just it's a title that I invented at my former company, Brightroll. Kind of captures the multifaceted nature of my role as a technical co-founder here at Pipedream. Again, I do a lot of developer advocacy and some data science work, a little product management work for us. Formerly, I taught data analytics at Berkeley and was a data scientist at Brightroll and Instacart for a couple of years. Like I mentioned, our team, there are 8 of us right now. We worked together for about the past 10 years, primarily at a company called Brightroll. It was a video advertising exchange that did a lot of programmatic delivery of advertising on the internet. So solved a lot of really high scale and big data challenges there. I mentioned this to David a little while ago. We actually used Equinix at Brightroll. We had a big cage down in a data center here in California. So thank you, David and Equinix. Pipedream, like I mentioned, launched in October 2019. So a little over a year ago. And we've been building the platform and improving it ever since. So fundamentally, Pipedream is an integration platform. If you've heard of or ever used tools like Zapier, IFT, Integromat, Pipedream falls broadly into that category. I'll talk about how we're similar to those tools and also how we're different. So an integration platform fundamentally just helps you automate workflows, often between or within applications. Apps is a broad term. By that, I mean any API or service provided by some app. Pipedream workflows are event-driven, and this is pretty common with these platforms. So some event typically triggers a workflow. That can be an HTTP request, an email, an event from a third-party API or SaaS service. And then when that event occurs, we run some workflow, some set of steps that define our automation. So for example, some common ones, every time a new file is uploaded to Google Drive, I want to receive an email. So I might want to watch a specific folder and get notified immediately when someone uploads a file. I might save tweets to Google Sheets if I'm a data scientist and doing analysis on some political tweets, for example. I may want to just save all of those for archival and analysis later. Pipedream, like many integration platforms, supports cron jobs. So every day I want to run a SQL query, send those results to Slack. And Pipedream, as many platforms do, have this generic HTTP interface. So I can spin up a workflow, I get an HTTP endpoint, I can send any HTTP request to that endpoint, and then, for example, save the payload to S3 or some storage somewhere. So where Pipedream differs than the other integration platform, most other integration platforms that I mentioned before, we squarely target developers. So I want to go through what this means. Fundamentally, at the top, this diagram, I think, kind of explains the general premise of Pipedream well. Like I mentioned, you have triggers. Okay, the trigger can be an HTTP request, an incoming Slack message, whatever starts your workflow, that event is the trigger. Now in Pipedream, I can run any Node.js code that I want. We have thousands of prepackaged steps that we call actions. We'll go over some of these today. Actions are just Node code that someone else wrote and packaged it such that Pipedream provides a UI for interacting with that step. You don't have to write the Node code. You can just use the pre-existing code that we've written. But behind the scenes, everything is actually Node code, and you can write your own. So I have a lot of workflows where I trigger an event on some incoming event from AWS, for example. And then I run custom Node code without using any of the pre-built steps, because my workflow is very custom to my use case, right? Nobody's created a step for that before. So Pipedream gives you this flexibility. And then we also have managed auth. This is one of the other secret sauces of Pipedream that integration platforms do well. We essentially let you one-click OAuth into hundreds of apps. Some apps, you enter your API key because that's the way that integration works. But Pipedream stores that authorization information, and then it uses that within your workflow. So we, for example, refresh authorization tokens so that you manage none of what is often a complex auth process for these apps. You just one click, you're in, and you can use your own account and get access to your resources. So some of Pipedream's key ideas, just to reiterate some of these things, I shouldn't have to write code to build a workflow. So we do, this is why we see ourselves as similar to the Zapiers or the if this then that's of the world. Even as an engineer, I don't want to write code if I'm just developing a quick integration, right? If it's tangential to my core workflow, I just want to get it out and get something working, okay? But the key idea is that I can write code, right? If I need to extend it, I want to be able to get into the code and modify it slightly if that step doesn't quite suit my needs. When I do write code, it should be easy. I shouldn't have to spin up, for example, a Docker container or a pod in Kubernetes just to run a basic workflow, right? I shouldn't have to create an AWS Lambda script. In the end, right, I just want to be able to quickly write code, deploy it, test it, and ship it. So we'll go into how that development workflow works in Pipedream. I mentioned everything is JavaScript. Okay, so even the pre-built steps that you use in Pipedream, it's all just Node code. You can click into a step and modify it in any way you want. When you write custom Node code, you can require any NPM package. So you can extend Pipedream to the NPM ecosystem. Integrations are open source. Okay, so all the actions that we provide, again, you can see and modify that code to suit your needs. We'll talk about event sources. Event sources fundamentally are workflow triggers, like I mentioned. So anytime you receive a new tweet, run your workflow. That trigger, right? Anytime I receive a new tweet, we call that an event source. Those are also open source in our GitHub repo, and I'll show you a link to that at the end. So anyone can submit PRs for new triggers. Anyone can modify any existing event sources. We have things that, again, as a developer platform, we have expectations of developers for, I need to maintain state across executions. I need a key value store, for example. I need to manage the concurrency and rate limiting. I might need to serialize the execution of my workflows if I'm managing state that depends on a single execution finishing before the next begins, or I have a downstream API that's rate limited. So I have to make sure incoming events are buffered and then are executed at a given rate limit so I don't hit those rate limits in my downstream service. So all of the controls that you expect from, again, a mature platform that provides state and these controls Pipedream provides. We also believe that low volume workflows should be free, and currently our free tier provides 100,000 invocations. So I can run a workflow that's an invocation, 100,000 invocations per month, okay? There are daily caps and some other platform limits that we embed, but fundamentally, we love to provide the platform for free so people can use it. If you need to run more than 100,000 invocations a month, you can upgrade to our professional tier. So the last slide, I just wanted to, this will segue nicely into what David and I are going to do today. But we often hear the question for new Pipedream developers, where does Pipedream fit into my stack? So I wanted to call out 4 common use cases just to kind of pin those in your mind. One of the most common ones is I have an asynchronous HTTP-driven workflow. The trigger here is just an example of the HTTP-driven workflow. But fundamentally, I have some logic where I want to send, for example, an HTTP request to Pipedream, and then have Pipedream manage all the other logic for what I'm going to do in my workflow. But Pipedream responds immediately to me with a 200 OK. Once I send the request, Pipedream says, I've got it, and I'm going to run the rest of this logic asynchronously. And Pipedream workflows can run up to 5 minutes for each invocation. So again, Pipedream is handling all of that workflow logic async, and you can continue to send events, get that immediate 200 OK response, process them. I link to a workflow here that actually handles our new user signup flow. This is a common one. So we just send an HTTP request with the user's email, their name. We send the user an email behind the scenes. We track it for analytics purposes, etc. We also provide the ability to create your own HTTP APIs. So if you need to respond back to the client, you can do that from a Pipedream workflow, right? So incoming request comes, I hit some third-party API from the workflow, I crunch the data, and then I respond with that back to the client. One of the simplest examples is I can actually turn a Google spreadsheet into a JSON API. So take the data I have in the spreadsheet, return it back formatted as JSON to the client. Cron jobs are a big one for us. I believe Pipedream is one of the easiest ways to run a cron job. Hopefully we can just show that off really quickly today. Internally, we run a lot of SQL queries to do database checks. We send a lot of custom metrics to CloudWatch, for example, on a schedule, etc. Finally, the big class of workflows is ones that are triggered from, again, these SaaS or third-party API events. Every time I get a new tweet, I want to save it to Google Sheets. Internally, we do a lot with AWS. So I have AWS events triggering a workflow, and I'm making other AWS API calls. Or we do a lot with, again, our professional plan. We have a lot of customers via Stripe. So we're handling a lot of internal workflows there. I link to a workflow here that shows how to send, anytime a customer cancels, how to send that to Slack. We do some other workflows related to that. So again, these 4 categories, it's not exclusive, but these are a lot of the things people use Pipedream workflows for. That's it for now. I hope that gives a good introduction to Pipedream. Yeah, we can hopefully kick it off with some specific examples from here.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that sets the scene well. Hopefully everyone understands the kind of the value proposition. And then now we get to get hands-on and actually show them how to put some of this into practice, which is going to be really cool. So let me pop up my screen. So if anyone wants to follow along, the docs are available at docs.pipedream.com. A lot of what Dylan has just said is also here, along with a lot more information. The docs are pretty nifty. But I'm feeling particularly brave today, so we're just going to go straight to my account. So shall we try and break down some of that vocabulary then that you've had in your slides and that we have in front of us here, just to familiarize people with what they're looking at from the kind of the dashboard point of view. So
yes.
So we have workflows. Do you want to kind of just tell us what a workflow is in the context of Pipedream?
Yeah, a workflow is specifically a linear sequence of steps. The first step of a workflow, maybe if you want, we could just create a new workflow now to walk people through it. So you've got that blue new button. What triggers should we use.
Will we just start with the simple cron scheduler?
Sounds great. So yeah, you can see here, I'll briefly, actually maybe click the X because I skipped over probably a pretty important step. You can delete any step at any time. So when I create a new workflow, I'm presented with this menu of possible triggers that I can select. The top option is, I mentioned the term event source. We'll talk about that in a sec, but an event source is a trigger essentially for a workflow that wraps logic for how to source that event from the third-party app or API. So an event source for Twitter, for example, again, lets me run a workflow on new tweets. You also have these simple, what we call native triggers, HTTP, cron, email, and SDK. Those four you have available to you at any time. So I can create an HTTP endpoint, and like David just did, we can create a cron job. So we can select the cron scheduler trigger, and then our workflow will run on the schedule we specify. And we have simple human readable. I can schedule a workflow every hour, every minute. You can enter any cron expression in any time zone as well if you want that level of control. So you have a lot of options there. So we have a cron trigger. We can select any trigger at this point and go ahead and deploy the workflow to memorialize this. Once we deploy the workflow, we have the trigger. You also see this big Run Now button, and that lets us trigger a workflow manually. So we can do that for our tests. You'll notice here, there's not a lot of interesting information that comes in the event, but the second that David clicked Run Now, notice on the left, we have this event in what we call the inspector. Okay, so that's just where incoming events live. When we send a test event, we automatically selected that event as well. And that's why you see this data in the top trigger step. So the most interesting information, which we expand by default, is the incoming event data. And steps.trigger.event is the name of the variable that allows you to access that event data in future steps of your workflow. So for cron, again, it's not that interesting, and typically we wouldn't access the actual event data, but you do actually have the epoch timestamp of the invocation, and then the timer config there indicates this is actually triggered manually versus triggered on its own schedule. So if you wanted logic that maybe only ran on test events, you could actually do that here, for example. If you briefly select steps.trigger.context and expand that accordion, this is also metadata about the workflow invocation. So for example, this also shows the timestamp at which it ran. There's a unique event ID that Pipedream assigned so that if you wanted to store that in your own downstream system, all the metadata here, your user ID, the deployment ID is technically, it changes every new version you deploy of your workflow. Briefly, I'll just also mention at the top header, just above the workflow, you'll notice a couple of things. You can add a title to your workflow, my awesome cron job or whatever. You'll notice we made a couple of edits, and so we're already on version 3. But if you click on that dropdown, you can always revert back to a previous version of your workflow as well. And you'll see the code in read-only mode. You can then redeploy that version if you want, or go back to the latest version. Code is always private by default, but you can make it public. And so a lot of the workflows in the slide deck that I shared that we'll share later, we've made those workflows public so that you can see it, and then you can copy that for your own use case. So that's one interesting thing about the open source nature of Pipedream we love is, I've written a workflow once, I can share that with someone, you can copy it, you can remix it in any way you want, right? So public workflows are really nice for sharing code in that manner. Your data is always private. We're actually working on a feature to allow even data to be made public, which is also an interesting use case for demo purposes, right? Or I want to show off an event stream. I want to create an analysis. Again, I'm a data scientist and I'm processing tweets. I want to actually show those incoming tweets and show how that data changes to the course of the workflow, right? To show step by step all the transformations I'm doing. So that'll come later, but again, by default, code's private, data's private. And then we've got our trigger step now, And like I mentioned, workflows are right now a linear sequence of steps. So we show the option then to create the next step. And this is where actions come in. So you'll see here, and if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see below this a list of common apps as well. But you can search for anything in the search bar at the very top of the step selector. So what kind of code do you want to run? Do you want to just run Node.js code or run a custom action for this?
Yeah, why don't we just run some Node.js code now, and then we'll maybe add on a couple more to run through some of the more common ones and take it from there.
Cool. So the very first option, run Node.js code. Notice that at the very top of this step, by default, this step has a name. It's steps.node.js. And that'll become important later because when steps return data, we are able to reference that data at that step's namespace. And so I'll walk through that in a second, but just remember that all steps are named. I can connect apps to this custom step. So if I wanted to write custom node code where I interacted with the Spotify API, for example, I could connect my Spotify account. And you can do that by clicking the plus button at the very top left of this. We won't do this now, but if you click on that, it should open a modal that allows you to select any app and then an associated account you would select for that app. So again, even custom Node.js code, you can actually connect apps so that you have access to your authorization data. For now, maybe just do a console log statement, and we can see how that works.
Easy.
Awesome. So we also have keyboard shortcuts, and depends on your platform, but Command D on a Mac and Control D on a PC or Linux should deploy your workflow, or you can click on the deploy button up there. But now, notice the version at the top incremented, it's version 4, right? So every deploy you make cuts a new version of your workflow, deploys it to a whole new execution environment on the back end. I should note that everyone's workflows are sandboxed inside every version of a workflow technically is sandboxed inside its own virtual machine. So all the memory and disk is yours and yours alone. Go ahead and click Run Now again, and let's take a look at what this produces. So any console logs, any standard output or standard error shows up below the step that produced it. Okay, so any logs you want to log, you just put a console log statement in there, and you're good. Now notice we say no return values or exports for this step. Have you worked with custom step exports?
I believe so, yes. You mean when you use this dot to set something?
Exactly. So we have this concept that we call step exports. Return values work the same way, and we can maybe show off both. But if you deselect the event just by clicking on the event in the inspector and get back to the code, just below the console log step, maybe we can add a step export to show people how this works. So notice David's type this.name, okay? When I deploy and run this, let's maybe just see end to end how it works, because it's easy to show off with the observability. So we've got that original console log statement, and now we see steps.node.js.name David. So again, the name of my step is steps.node.js. Steps.node.js.name, I exported from steps.node.js by saying this.name. So in the context of steps, JavaScript, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you probably hate this. It took me a long time to learn this, especially as an old data scientist going from Python. But in the context of steps, this just refers to the current step. By saying this.name equals value, I export that value at that step.property name. So in this case, name. If you hover over that row, you'll see the option to copy either the variable path, steps.node.js.name, or the value. Okay. So in future steps, I can reference that export. Again, workflow is just a linear sequence of steps. And so when I run one step, I get access to that data, maybe just a console log it, and we can confirm that everything works okay. So a lot of our actions for, again, common apps like Twitter and Spotify, et cetera, that's all pre-baked Node code. They have their own step exports. They return data automatically, and then you'll often see that data below a step.
I think we covered quite a lot there, but I just want to highlight some of the things that I think just make this such a cool platform to be building on top of. So firstly, the event inspector on the left is invaluable when you start to connect to other sources and triggers where you don't really understand what the payload is going to be like yet. And the autocomplete and the ability to copy the paths from these tools inside of each step are also invaluable. Like, see, those two things alone are just phenomenal. And I think as we start to build out more, why that is so cool will definitely become apparent to people. The automatic versioning is very, very cool. I love the idea of making my things public. What actually happens for me personally is that my code is so awful, I think I'll clean that up later and then make it public. But at the same time, it works, and then I never clean it up. So, like, double-edged sword for me, at least, anyway. But being able to share them is very, very cool. And yeah, the authentication thing, again, not having to manage OAuth for any of this, the ability to just click, hey, I want to do something with Spotify and have that automatically pass in my credentials to this step for me to consume. We're very, very, very cool.
Cool. Good to hear.
All right, let's do something a little bit more tangible then. That sounds like a good plan. So let's I guess we don't need to create a new workflow. I'll just clean this up a little bit. And we're not going to go with cron. Shall we bring in the Twitter integration?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's filter on Twitter. And
so this is part of our UX that we are currently optimizing, actually. But to create did you want to create a new Twitter source?
Yeah, I did, and then I tried to filter, but I think I need to scroll down, don't I?
So that you should be able to search Twitter, see Twitter, and create it. Right now, you have to click Create Event Source, and then that brings you into the menu for creating any. So event sources, just to reiterate, right, are essentially just workflow triggers. You can do a lot more with event sources, and we can talk about that later if we have the time. But you create an event source to create a trigger from a third-party SaaS app. Select the app. You've got a range of specific sources.
Let's do search mentions. And this connect button is always my favorite thing because that's the OAuth done. And I just go, hey, I'm cool.
Yeah. Yeah, if you didn't have an existing account, you would be prompted to authorize Pipedream's access to your Twitter account with our OAuth app, and you'd be good to go.
So I just add this hashtag. I've never actually used this hashtag on a show. This is the first time. So, I think there's only 2 sample tweets that I was doing with earlier, but we'll do a search for Rawkode Live. Recent, we can filter it to not include retweets or not include replies. The language filter, locale, there's loads of ways to be able to interact it. And I don't need to understand the Twitter API. Someone else has already went to the effort and contributed this to the project, which is great. And because we're doing this
took us a while. Event sources can be pretty difficult to build, and it really depends on the third-party API. But again, you can take a look at all the source code in GitHub for this if you did want to understand how it works and you did want to tweak it. I think you may have seen, but if you scroll down just a little bit before you create source, you also can see the component code right there. Again, the diction, I think, is one of the hardest parts when you're getting familiar with Pipedream, because we do use a lot of specific terms. Components are just this term for a Node.js module that is written in a specific format to create things like event sources. So that's all that is the component is just the event source. It's a Node module. You can see how it works. When you create the source, you can even edit that source on your own. So in your account, that event source gets created, but if you click Edit Code and Configuration, then you can edit. You can change the configuration if you wanted to, and you can edit the code. So all of that's available to you.
Nice. And we actually see, I think this is another, I have a lot of favorite things about Pipedream. So, but this here, this preview of what the event data worked with, because obviously I'm going to want to do something with this, and just being able to see that and be able to copy the past and stuff is really cool.
I hear you.
And there's my last tweet.
Nice. Yeah.
All right. So, sorry, Indigo. No, okay. So let's try and do something with this. Now there's loads of integrations that we can play with. We spoke briefly just before we went live, and I said, hey, it would be cool if we could have people tweet Rawkode live as a hashtag and the name of a song, and we're going to try and attempt to look up that song on Spotify and add it to a playlist. So let's see if we can get that going. So that's your cue. People are watching. If you can use the Rawkode live hashtag and just type the name of a song, and we'll do our best to try and add that to a playlist. And if you all don't do it, I'll just tweet my own. That's okay. Just means I'll prefer the music anyway. So I'm going to click send as test event. And now we can begin to work with this data. So I guess the first thing we need to do is look up the tweet text, or maybe split the tweet text. See, I never really thought this through, did I? It's probably harder than I thought it was going to be. Let's assume the only bit of text that comes through is just the name of a song.
Cool.
So we'll just go straight to the lookup stage. We're not going to try and parse anything.
Cool.
And let's see. What do we need? I'm assuming just, is there a get track? Let's see.
Yeah, let's see.
We'll just look up get tracks.
Right is, oh yeah, I guess, so I think get tracks might take the Spotify ID for that track, but I think there's a search action that, I'm not sure exactly how the Spotify API works, but we can work through it. Try just doing Spotify, and then you'll see a search for an item, get /
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Well, let's connect this up. And now we can just pass in the terms. So let's assume, using the previous event that we have here, that the full text is what we want. So, in fact, we will need to remove the Rawkode live from it. There, the plot thickens. Okay, so we're going to add a custom step before we do that then, where we want to take our full text. We can just paste this in. And this is a string. I already know that's a string, and I'm getting autocomplete. So let's just do a really crude replace. And now this is where your knowledge is going to come in. Does this update in line and I'll have access to that? Or should I try and set something like this?
Yeah, you will either do this song title, or you can just return steps.trigger. Both of those would give you access to the return value. And then that, let's see if I'm correct. I think that $return value reference should be accessible in the param selector of the next step. The value, you won't see a value associated with it, but if you select steps, Node.js, return $return value, right? That's when you use return instead of a specific step export, that's how we represent that.
Okay, and then this one's a type, so I'm going to say track.
And then I think you have an ST at the front of the search, the query param.
Ooh, good catch.
And yeah, I think let's give it a try.
All right. No one's tweeted me yet. I'm disappointed, so I'm going to say...
My team should be listening too, and there's some music fans there, so hopefully someone has a good song in mind.
All right. Well, I have now tweeted a song. I'm going to hit deploy. Let's just let this run. And this is now on, what was it, 15 seconds we set this up for? I think so.
Nice.
I guess for now we can hit the test event, which will be my last previous tweet, and we should still be able to see at least the response come back with, I would assume, nothing.
Yeah, let's see what Spotify does with it.
Okay, so let's see. Yeah, there's a return value, and it did remove our hashtag, which is good. And magically, we got some songs. No, we didn't. We got 7 fields, but no items. Perfect.
Right.
All right. Oh, I didn't enable the trigger. There we go.
And then if you scroll up, you'll go ahead and deselect the specific event again. And then under the test banner, go ahead and expand that test accordion and hit that refresh button. And now go, so this is one of your test tweets still, but I bet, there we go. Your new one should show up there. There's again, we're working on this UX to improve it. There's a couple of steps just to get that new test data in there.
Okay, so let's just send this as a test event, make sure our workflow does hopefully what we wanted it to. Let's see. So it removed the hashtag and we got 20 options, which is good.
And so it looks like someone else might have tweeted as well, because you see that another event came in just above it.
Well, that might be the actual trigger pulling in my event. No, it's not. It's someone else.
Yeah, when you so when you selected that turn on the trigger switch, that turned the trigger live, such that now we are receiving live events. But it looks like it's working, so maybe that's fine.
Nice. Well, that's a good start. Let me pull them up. Yeah, okay, cool. We did have someone else tweet. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks. If you, this is the reason we have that toggle, so that while you're developing your, pause the live stream and then turn it live once you developed your workflow.
Okay, so we're not going to do anything sophisticated here. We'll just grab the first response from this items list and let's add that to a playlist. Let me get my Spotify up as well. Let's see. What we have here is an empty Pipedream playlist. Well, let's see if we can get this going. So we just want to add another step. We're using the selector. I'm pretty sure there was an, we have to scroll down. There is an add track. I'm sure I looked for this. Let's see, add tracks to playlist. All right. Let's see, how do I get my Spotify ID? Oh. You still there? Oh, I think I lost Dylan. All right, I'll just keep mumbling through it. Let's see, how do I get the ID?
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
Yep, you seem to be back now. I'm not sure what happened there.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep. Yeah, thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. Okay, so I wonder if there's a way for me to get my Spotify ID from here. Let's connect to it. Oh, Dylan's definitely gone now. All right, I'm just going to log into the Spotify web interface to get those IDs. Oh, and he's back. There you go. Welcome back.
Yeah, I moved to a place with better Wi-Fi. I hope you can hear me okay.
Oh yeah, you're sounding good now.
Great.
So I was just going to log into the Spotify web interface because I realized I didn't know how to get my Spotify user ID.
There is a get me endpoint in Spotify, and I think we should have an action for that, and that should return your user ID. So you may want to add that, near the top of your workflow,
Good idea. Right, yep, get me. There we go. Connect. And I'm just going to assume I'm going to want to list playlist as well. So, let's see. Users playlists. Cool. All right. So what we want to do is save. Oh, I'm going to have to remove the playlist one, aren't I? Because I can't satisfy that. I can make it up. Right. ABC one.
Yeah. And if you'd like, do you see when you hover over the step, there's that green toggle in the top right?
Yeah. Well, there we go.
And if you want, you could just disable any of these steps, right?
All right, let's just turn these off just now. So we should be in a position where if I deploy this, I'm now going to be requesting my own profile information from Spotify. We can grab the user ID, pass it into the get playlist one, get the playlist ID, and then add our track to the playlist.
I like the way this is coming together.
Well, yeah, it's nice to see how. I mean, these are things that people are going to have to do as they start to play with it and explore with it. And it's nice that you don't need to leave this workflow experience to do any of that either. So,
right.
All right. So get me. We need to click run.
If you expand the test accordion one more time, it should go ahead and deselect this event. And then expand the test accordion at the.
Yeah.
There we go.
And then send it. See, I know this stuff. I'm just being silly. All right. Okay, there's me. There's my ID. So I'm going to enable the playlist action. We're going to drop in our user ID here. We're going to deploy this. And then we're going to come back up here. And run this again. And now we should get a list of playlists. There we go. So I have 8. I'll assume the recent one is this one. Nope, that's my riffs playlist. Film scores for coding. Covers. Now you're getting an insight into my music history. Energy boost. Of course it was the first one, wasn't it? And this is the ID that we want. So I'm going to disable this. And I'm going to enable our add. And we pop open these params. We can put in the playlist ID. And then we grab the user ID again, which is here. And then we need to just ensure that we pass through a track URI from the search as well. So let's disable the get me. And did I move the track search?
It's just above this last step. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to need to run a test event. So let's just deploy this. And do this. All right. So let's do in the Node.js step. Skipping over those, and here's a search. And it's got an href, which I'm assuming is all we need.
You know, that href looks like the reference for that query.
You're correct.
You'll notice inside, and it's funny that it returned multiple items, but I guess we could just take the first one, right?
Yeah, we'll just grab the first one. So we've got this items with 20 songs that it found. We want this URI, so we're going to use the helper, copy path. We're going to re-enable this, pop open the params, add our variable, and deploy. And that may just be crazy enough to work. All right, I'll just fire through the same test event. And then now we'll see if the Spotify app. Oh, wow. There we go.
Awesome.
Great.
Awesome.
That was fun.
That was. I love the just the iteration of like having to get my user ID. I mean, it's all the grunt work involved in every integration, like you said, right? It's tough to piece the steps together, and the problem is just always more complex when you work with these third-party APIs. But yeah, we think the observability and the testing at least helps as much as we can.
Definitely. All right. Now, just because Frank, you were kind enough to send me this, I'm going to send your event through too, just to see what we get in the playlist, and then we'll move on to another demo. Come on, there we go. And Flames, good tune. Awesome. Thank you, Frank. That was fun.
Awesome.
All right. What else are you feeling? Anything you want to pick up here?
Let's see. You wanted to do some stuff with Discord, right?
Yeah, let's do something with Discord.
Yeah.
So we have, I can't remember if there's a Discord. Do we want, no. Yeah. I'm just having an internal monologue for myself that you're not invited to. So let's create an event source. We have Discord already connected. I think we did Discord bot, and then we do channel.
You had the Pipedream bot installed on your guild, right?
I do, yes.
Go ahead and try to select Discord, actually. And as long as you select the same off provision, the same guild that you had, then I think this should work. And the reason, so we have two Discord integrations. There's the Discord one where we install the Pipedream bot in your guild. That actually allows us to listen for new messages immediately. So you add a new message to whatever channel you want to listen to. You can actually select multiple channels here, right? And then Pipedream should ping this event source immediately. If you use the Discord bot integration, you can run your own bot. So if that's your use case, you could actually set up your own bot in your guild, connect that bot to Pipedream. That integration, though, runs on a cron, since there's no real-time integration for listening for bot messages. So you can kind of see these event sources. Some work instantly because there's a webhook or a WebSocket integration that talks to Pipedream. Some, because the API doesn't support webhooks, we have to run on a schedule, like you did for Twitter. So just a brief description kind of, that's all the work that we do when we build an event source internally.
Nice. Okay. So let's just say your Discord message. Let's get this live. Great. So why don't we just have it relay messages onto my Twitter account then? What could go wrong with that?
Nice.
So it's right now it's listening for an event. So did I prepare? I did. Okay. So we can just say hello live stream. You're saying this should be, yeah, that was pretty instant there. Awesome. Okay. So let's do something with that. Now I do have my Twitter connected too. We can just have this post a tweet. Do you want to do anything in the middle first, or just post it direct?
Yeah, let's try direct to make sure it works. Then maybe we could decorate it. Similar to the Spotify example. Let me think about like data we could get about it, right? Like I feel like there's another API we could use in the middle.
Yeah, I wonder if we could do some sort of GIF lookup or something like that to attach
right,
it to the tweet.
Right. We do integrate with Giphy, and so that's a great example.
All right, so in fact, I'll just copy the path here instead of picking something random. So let's see, what do we have? Let's include the author name. So Rawkode says, where was my message? Hello, live stream. I guess clean content. Is that just escaped, I guess?
Yeah, I actually don't know. That's funny.
Well, we'll find out. So we've now set our status, and we can just deploy this. I guess what we've done is just decided that we're going to replicate all the messages from here. This is relayed to my from my Discord with. Oh, I didn't turn it on.
I know we're it's one of the UX things we need to improve. But the event should have come in. So if you select it as a test event, it should work. But yeah, you could try that again. Perfect.
And let's go check out my Twitter. Rawkode says this is relayed from my Discord with Pipedream. Okay, let's do something a bit more fun with this then. Not that that wasn't fun, but we can jazz that. So you said I've never played with the Giphy integration. So let's see. What do we need to do? Search. GIF search, I guess.
GIF search, I believe, is the one. Yes.
API key.
Yes.
All right, I'll do that over here. I think I have a Giphy account. And uninteresting bit, but I promise a second. It's telling me it sent me a 2-factor code, but I don't have one. All right. Okay, let's scratch that plan.
Yeah, I'm looking through some other, text decoration APIs, like anything that we could pass text to. I guess, one thing you could do, I forget if Giphy has any public API endpoints. I don't know if they do. There is are you a Star Wars fan?
Yeah.
The Star Wars API. And, I'm wondering if we could just as an example, hit that API to decorate it with some, you can, for instance, get a random starship or a species or a planet. They have APIs actually for listing all those resources. So we could just decorate it with that as a simple example. There's, what do you think about that? There's a Reddit integration that we could use.
Well, what's the Star Wars API? We'll just hit that. We don't even need to use it. We're just composing random stuff here. So
yeah. So if you search for a new step, it's technically Swappy, SWAPI.
Okay. Starship.
And I think maybe just try the return random character name. Like that wraps a little bit of logic. You'll notice they have a people API. And so, if you hit that, you get a list of people back. We just happen to return a random Star Wars character, right? And then you can use that return value in future steps. Let's make sure that still works.
Yeah, so I've just disabled the auto tweet. And then what we'll do is we'll fire through one test event, and then we'll see what we get back from Swappy. We got C3PO, so I'm going to copy the path, re-enable our tweet. And instead of me tweeting it, then we'll just say that the author is a random Star Wars character. Why not? So that's all enabled. I'll send the Discord message. So let's see. So somebody from Star Wars says, "Hello, these are the correct droids." Why not? There we go. We got that, and we posted the tweet. So R2D2 says these are the correct droids.
Awesome.
We rushed the Twitter account, and there we go.
Awesome.
Fun. I like that. That was good.
Do you want to go into some of there are some advanced settings here that I think could be interesting to peruse, just to kind of take this and, we've obviously been playing around with some kind of trivial, if this, then, do this. But I wanted to show off some more advanced examples where, for example, like concurrency can come into play.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
So if you go into your settings, near the top, Right. So I just want to walk through, we can walk through each of these because they're actually all interesting features of Pipedream. First of all, we haven't talked about errors because you actually haven't made any. So congratulations. It's cool that we've gotten this far without throwing any error. Maybe we can do that just to see how it works in a moment. But at a high level, Pipedream will, number one, display any error that's thrown by a node step within the step and show you very clearly, what step that happened in. And we try to surface as much information as we can about the error. We also forward that error to what we call the global error workflow. By default, maybe if you open this in a new tab, we can just take a look. Have you messed around with this at all?
So I only noticed the global error workflow maybe a couple of days ago. I wasn't sure if I just missed it all this time or if it was new. So
yeah, it's meant to be hidden because it runs on autopilot. Now the idea is by default, this is just another workflow. So if an error happens in one of your workflows, it just sends the error to this workflow, and this workflow sends you an email with all the details of the errors. You've probably gotten those emails before, I imagine, when you have an error. But in essence, by default, you'll receive one email per unique error per workflow every 24 hours. So all that means is we don't want to spam you. If you have a high volume workflow that throws the same exact error, you'll only get one email in a 24-hour period. But if you get a new error, you'll get a new email, right? Because it's a new issue you need to troubleshoot. So by default, this workflow handles all that logic for you. If this logic is just what I described, but if you scroll down briefly, you'll see the email me step. So you can email yourself from any Pipedream workflow. There's this action, email me, that you can search for in any workflow. You can also use this special function in Node, $send.email. So $send exposes a bunch of these special functions, $send.email, $send.s3, $send.http, is a Pipedream built integration for quickly sending data to common destinations like that. Email is just one of those destinations. So again, we're essentially just dogfooding our own product here by creating this workflow and then letting it drive your error notifications for all of your workflows. And the cool thing is, since it's a workflow, you can modify it in any way you want. If you wanted to send, and you did, there we go. That's awesome.
Yeah, when I noticed the new, I thought it was a new feature. I was like, I wonder if I can have it send all the errors to my Discord. Although I haven't had any errors yet. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what we hope people will do, right? If you use Discord or Slack or Telegram, right, you should be able to send messages to your destination of choice. So the global error workflow, if you go back to your workflow settings, that's essentially by default it's on. There's a ton of other, I wish we had time to cover this. I don't think it's worth going into the whole API today, but I'll briefly show you. If you look at our API docs back in docs, and then scroll down to the API section, go to the REST API. This lists all of our API endpoints we expose in our REST API. There's a lot that you can do. The reason I thought of this is we have an endpoint for retrieving the workflow errors via API. So if, for example, you wanted highly custom error handling, for a specific workflow, you'd actually get the workflow errors for a specific workflow, send those to a custom workflow. It's similar to, are you familiar with AWS Lambda? Do you work with Lambda at all?
I have done in the past, yeah.
Yeah, there's concepts in Lambda and in other systems where you essentially have an error handler per Lambda function, right? The global error workflow, I think, simplifies it because you don't need to think about error handling, right? All errors by default are sent to this global workflow. You get an email, you deal with them. But the idea is, if you want that advanced control for, I want to handle errors for this workflow in this specific way, you can actually have your own error handling workflow set up for a specific workflow. And some of the endpoints here with workflows and specifically subscriptions allow you to subscribe to errors or events from specific workflows. So, the UI is really just a skin on top of all of this, but behind the scenes, you have a lot of capabilities to really extend how workflows work. So again, if you want to listen for workflow errors, you can do that. If you want multiple triggers for one workflow, you can actually set that up as well. And it works in all different directions. So this subscription model via API allows you to essentially have a workflow subscribe to events coming in from multiple sources. You can then have those workflows emit events and have multiple workflows subscribe to those. So for pretty complex workflows, some people need these capabilities. And I just wanted to highlight that it's possible via the REST API. So if you're interested, take a look at the docs.
One of the use cases you mentioned there is something I actually tried to do this week, was have multiple triggers on a workflow. So nice to know that I can do that by some API.
Yeah.
So.
We're still working on all the UI components. So you'll be able to list and create the triggers via the API. You won't see it in the UI yet, but we're working on all of that. The next things I wanted to show off, you by default have this timeout of 30 seconds. If your workflow runs for longer than 30 seconds, it would time out, but you can increase that up to 300 seconds, up to 5 minutes. We keep it at 30 seconds because we don't want you to make a mistake and then have your workflow just run and use your compute time, because on the free tier you are capped on compute time on a daily quota. It's pretty generous again, so most people don't hit it, but again, we default to 30 seconds just to keep you under that cap. But for long-running workflows, it does make sense to increase it. And then under that, you'll see you have a lot of controls over throttling and concurrency. So I mentioned both of these earlier, but concurrency, I think, is the easiest one to understand for people, right? Like you can, if you check the limit concurrency box, by default, this serializes the execution of your workflow. So if there's something you're doing in your workflow where you're handling state, and that state should not be mutated by multiple executions of the same workflow, right? Where you have some global shared like singleton state, you can serialize your workflow here so that incoming Discord messages, right? If you get multiple messages at the same time, we'll queue up those messages and then only run your workflow one message at a time, right? The throttling works in combination if you want, right? You could, but normally, you might use it like I mentioned earlier with a rate limit use case. Like let's say you receive the Discord messages, you're doing something with the Spotify API. Spotify API might have its own rate limit. And so you need to balance the incoming messages with that Spotify rate limit so that you don't hit, if you get 1,000 messages at once from Discord, you may get rate limited on Spotify's end. So you can throttle the execution to only run, say, 60 events every minute, right? If that's the Spotify rate limit. So this is where the advanced controls really come in to play. Like it's, again, it's subtle, right? But with APIs, especially, we see it all the time. You have either state-related issues, like if you're even writing to Google Sheets, it's not a state-related issue, but if you blast this Discord source with messages and try to send all those messages to Google Sheets, parallel executions of the workflow will overwrite the same row. And so you want to manage that, right? You have to serialize it. All these controls come into play for complex workflows. So that's why we built them.
Nice. All right. So let's show one more thing that I think is cool. We can maybe just talk about, we don't need to show just because of time, about the SQL store. And then I believe you've got a couple of your own examples that you're just going to quickly run us through as well to show what can be done. So the one thing that I really enjoyed, that I also want to show, and maybe we can cause an error here as well. I think we've got about 20 minutes left. So is the webhook. I think this is really, really cool. Been able to integrate with GitHub for their push events for the API or GitLab or any other sources, or even the Slack API. I don't know if they still do that, but the outgoing webhooks are really cool. Where Pipedream just gives me this URL that I can pass around anywhere I want and then get the payload back to here as well. Right. We don't need to do anything from this. I just think it's a really one of the really cool triggers that I like to play with as well.
Yeah, we use it all the time for internal workflows, and like you said, it's like we've tried to build up event sources to abstract webhook delivery from a lot of apps. So for GitHub, we're actually creating a webhook subscription in your repo that points to an endpoint behind the scenes, so that you don't have to set up any of this. But of course, we don't have full coverage of event sources for every app. So anytime you have a custom app that supports webhooks, like you said, you can go in here. This endpoint's unique to your workflow. You just copy it and paste it in the webhook settings, and you're getting events here. And this is more, we didn't look at the event data much before for cron because it wasn't that interesting. But this test event, you can see how there's a couple things here I'll mention. When we receive, for example, JSON data in the incoming payload, we parse it as a JavaScript object, and that's what you see in body. So, we do, and multi-part form data, other data, we think pretty hard about like, what are the most common formats and how do you want to consume those within a workflow? A JavaScript object is often the easiest mechanism. So again, you send JSON, you get it as an object in steps.trigger.event.body. And then you can inspect it just like you have before. So yeah, the HTTP trigger is pretty cool. We've got an email trigger as well. If you quit out of this and then select the email trigger, also unique email address specific to your workflow. So you can send any emails here with attachments, and those will actually get rendered in the event inspector, so you can parse any email data or handle attachments in that way.
Oh, cool. I actually didn't know about that one. That one's quite handy, actually. I can think of a few things I'd like to get out of my inbox and into some sort of automations.
Yeah. In between Brightroll, I worked with this team for a long time at Brightroll. In between Brightroll and Pipedream, I founded a company called MailCoach, where we did a lot with programmatic filter creation in Gmail. So trying to really help cut down on email volume for people. I wish I had Pipedream at that point, because there's a lot of automations that I wish I could have done, where you have a user who's trying to, process some email. We're trying to create a filter off of it. There's just so many automations with email that I think you can do that are interesting. And yeah, programmatic filter creation with Gmail is a big one on my mind, because I try to get as much email out of my inbox as possible too.
And what about the SDK? Do you want to give us a little bit of information on this?
Yeah, the SDK is, you can see example node snippets and Ruby snippets. So we publish, 3 clients. There's the JavaScript browser version that you can load on a front end app. There's the Node version, and then there's the Ruby SDK. And so if you're sending events from whatever client browser or server-side service you want, you can trigger an event in this way, right? So the relevant code is at the very bottom. Once you've got the PD SDK, you can just send event to that endpoint ID with whatever shape you want. Now this shape is pretty custom, and so essentially, before with HTTP and email, we saw steps.trigger.event.body, for example, because the body represents the payload in the HTTP context. With the SDK, you can fully control the shape of the event that you want to come in, and it helps to simplify things. And again, if you're sending data server side from an app you own, and then you want to trigger a Pipedream workflow off of that, the SDK is often a pretty easy option, because you get a lot more control over that incoming event shape.
Have you ever had anyone try to build their own Google Analytics using this?
Not that I know of. That's a really good use case, though. I mean, I could, we have people sending data to Google Analytics and Amplitude and other services. But yeah, I mean, I could envision just a lot you could do here with that.
Yeah, I've been trying to remove, I have removed Google Analytics from my own website, and I'm trying to use things that are a bit more privacy focused. And doing something like this is actually probably a pretty good step towards getting better at that.
Totally.
All right, let's see. What else did we not cover? We can go
SQL will probably take just 5 minutes to cover if you want to do that. I can show you how that works. So this is actually good because since you don't have any tables, you see the default experience here. We walk you through just a basic tutorial, but I'll walk everyone through this now. The SQL service is essentially like we thought a lot about what is the use case for me wanting to query analytics data that I get in a workflow. Like it's very common that I receive data from a webhook, from, for example, Stripe or SendGrid. And I want to run some basic analytics on that to look at how many unsubscribes or clicks we got for a given SendGrid campaign, for example. As a data scientist, like I don't want to do all the work to manage my data warehouse for all these workflows that are often just one-offs. Like if it's not core data and I just want to really quickly run some SQL on incoming data from a webhook or some source, the SQL service is kind of our intent at like getting to the simplest possible way to do that. So the idea is you just send JSON to a table. We actually create the table schema behind the scenes and manage that for you. So every user essentially has their own database. And you can create any number of tables in the SQL service simply just by sending JSON data to a table with a specific name. We create the table with that schema. If you send new data with a new schema to that same table, we adjust the schema over time. So it's essentially a dynamic schema managed for each of your tables. And again, it's all hosted. It's free to use. And the only restriction is that we expire all the data after 30 days automatically. But for common use cases where, again, I just need to get some insight like that, I'm a data guy, right? So I think of like, how can I ask all these interesting questions of my data? I immediately go to SQL, but I just don't want to manage the database and the schema for all this data, especially JSON, where the schema can change so much constantly, right? So that's the principle. Let's see how it works. If you go to a new workflow, does that all make sense, by the way?
Yeah, it does.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I will. I'll say yes. I'll work it out as we go here.
You can select any trigger you want and then add a new Node.js code step. So this is where the $send function comes in. We do actually have an action for this as well, but I'll show you the code because it's a little bit easier. $send.sql. And that accepts a JavaScript object as an argument. So with two properties, table, and you can enter whatever name you want here.
Okay, sure.
And then payload. And payload itself accepts a JavaScript object. And so put in whatever fields you want here. Awesome.
People don't believe me as I'm 21.
Yeah. Go ahead and deploy that. And run a test event. And so we, with destinations like this, we actually batch all the incoming events that you would send within a 60-second period, and then send those to the SQL service for processing. So it does take just a little bit of time the first time you create a table. But the idea is, you have thousands of events coming in at the same time. We're just batching all those and delivering those once a minute to the SQL service. But if you go back to the SQL tab, we can just, again, wait a second and refresh this. But pretty soon the table is going to show up on the left. And then we can start querying. If you go back to your workflow, you can also check on the status of the execution. So we do, when we deliver the event, if you click on that event on the left and you check, there we go. So we should be good now. Oh, it takes just a little longer. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So let's, fingers crossed. We've had luck in this demo so far.
What database is actually running behind the scenes?
Yeah, we use Amazon Athena, and so all the data is in S3, and then we create. We use Athena as the query engine. AWS Glue manages the schema. So Athena can inherit Glue. I didn't know anything about Glue before I used it for this, but essentially Glue manages your schema. So you see the schema there, name and age. And if you just select star from Rawkode, you should get your data. There you go. So yeah, you can, Athena's pretty powerful as a query engine. Supports window functions, all the kind of advanced capabilities you'd expect out of a legitimate database. And so again, if you have any questions you want to ask, really quickly of your data and you don't want to manage a data warehouse, this is a good option.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you for that. That is the first time I played with SQL, SQL stuff, so that was cool to see.
Awesome.
I guess, yeah, we kind of covered quite a lot there. So why don't we? Do you want to run through some of your own use cases then?
Sure. Yeah, I'll briefly. I had a couple more slides to show off some example workflows. So I'll share my screen again, and I'll show you a couple that we run internally that are a little more advanced. And these are all linked from here. So later on, if you want to take a look, they're all public. I'll start off with a little more advanced one. I won't go over all of this code, but I'll talk about the use case. So we run Kubernetes internally, and we have for those of you who are familiar with Kubernetes, we have a public node group. So Kubernetes, lets us manage a ton of different services really easily. We love it. We have this public node group that's responsible for some public-facing services, including destination delivery, actually. It's a $send.sql. And essentially, we have this problem where I'll briefly just show you, since we have a little bit of time, other destinations. So all the destinations, all the $send primitives I showed off, $send.email, $send.sql. There's one more, $send.http, that's probably the most commonly used. This allows you to send an HTTP request from a workflow. The key benefit of using the HTTP destination here versus using a client like Axios or GOT that you might typically be familiar with in JavaScript, the benefit of using this over those is these HTTP requests are actually handled asynchronously. And so when you run $send.http, if you have thousands of HTTP requests you want to send, you're actually not charged for the compute time of waiting for the response from the server, which can take maybe 200 to 300 milliseconds for some services, right? Or even longer. So given that you're capped on compute time in the free tier, you want to manage that, especially for high volume workflows. $send.http lets you send, again, any number of HTTP requests. We send the HTTP request behind the scenes, asynchronously outside of your workflow. So there's a lot going on there. The point is, it saves you a ton of compute time if you're making a lot of HTTP requests. Now, one of the first questions we got was, well, I need to whitelist Pipedream's IPs. So I can send data to services that I own or services that require an IP whitelist. These are our list of IPs. Now, when we're constantly adding new nodes that handle this traffic in our Kubernetes cluster. So one of the issues we ran across was we have this static list of IPs that we don't want to change. We need to keep that list, again, fairly static for users, but we get new nodes. How do we assign static IPs to those nodes automatically? Well, we have a Pipedream workflow handle this. When a new node comes online in our public node group, we get an event from AWS that comes into, you can't see it because this is the public version, but in my copy of the workflow, I have the HTTP endpoint that David showed off a few minutes ago. So AWS events trigger this workflow. And then, again, I won't go over this code, but there's a lot of stuff here that we've done to basically handle that event, get the node group, and then use the AWS API to assign one of our pool of IPs to that new node. So pretty narrow problem, but we realized okay, I just want to listen for new nodes, and I want to assign an IP address to that node when it comes online. So a Pipedream workflow is perfect because it's just an event-driven asynchronous workflow. So you can take a look at that. a little more. But I just wanted to kind of show you that, we use Pipedream a lot internally for our own workflows for some pretty hefty production use cases. So I know we've been going over Discord and Twitter, and Pipedream is fantastic for those use cases, but it does really help glue together a lot of AWS services and other services as well. So that's why I like that example. I have another DevOps. I know your audience, loves Kubernetes and ops stuff, so I'll show you one more here. SSLmate is this great API. They operate a specific API, called Cert Spotter, that lets you basically find certificates given a bunch of criteria. So domain is the main criteria. You can basically list all the SSL certs that have been published for a domain. We want to make sure that no certs are published for any domains we own that we don't know about. Now, that's just a common security thing that that's bitten some companies in the past, where someone actually creates an SSL cert for a domain that they don't own. So we want to get new domains new certs sent to us anytime we get a new cert spotted on the web. So you just list your domains here for pipedream.com, for example. This hits the Cert Spotter API. This runs on a cron schedule so that every few minutes it's checking for new certs. And then it just, down here, I use $send.email to email me any new certs. We haven't talked too much about $checkpoint, but $checkpoint is, it's a variable that gives you access to the built-in key value store for workflows. So I'll briefly just show you those docs. Let me search workflow state. So anytime you need to save data in a workflow and retrieve it in a future execution, workflow state using the variable $checkpoint lets you do that. There's also step level state. So this $checkpoint allows you to save data within a specific step and reference that data later. These docs are extensive and have a lot of examples, but briefly, we need to keep track of any certificates we've seen previously in previous executions of the workflow. And then I only want to get notified of new certificates. So Cert Spotter lists all the certificates. In the workflow, I keep track of the ones I've seen so far. And any new certificates that come in, I only email those. And I say new cert found for domains. Okay. So those are a couple examples. I linked to a lot of other blogs, including some from Raymond Camden, who is a developer advocate here and blogs about us a lot. He uses Pipedream for some demos internally. He's got a couple great blog posts here. I wrote up a blog post about how I used Pipedream to avoid parking tickets in San Francisco. That's a pretty fun one, and utilizes some APIs that the city of San Francisco provides on street cleaning schedules. So there's just a lot of examples here that I thought, a variety that I thought might be helpful for people new to Pipedream. The other thing I wanted to mention was, all of our code is on GitHub. Okay, I'll look at this repo really quickly. This repo contains all the code for primarily our event sources. We're planning to add our actions to GitHub soon as well, so people can submit PRs against those. So all the Spotify and Twitter actions David used today, those are going to be in GitHub hopefully pretty soon. Our docs are also here. So a lot of good stuff here if you want to consume Pipedream content and kind of see what we're open sourcing. We also run a big Slack community. So any questions you have, we're more than happy to answer them. We use GitHub discussions and Slack both as our help channels. And then just a bunch of docs and resources that I thought would be helpful. So as you dive into Pipedream, these are all good places to start to understand more about the concepts we talked about. But I'll let you peruse those in your own time.
Yeah, I'll make sure there's a link to those slides in the show notes so people can hopefully get a link to that and then through to all those additional resources. I feel like we covered an awful lot. I hope the people that are watching are, your interest is piqued and you're signing up for a Pipedream account now. The free tier is ridiculously generous. I've got to say, I don't think anyone's going to run into any issues getting started with Pipedream there. So There was one thing that popped into my head there just as we were wrapping up that I'm curious about. You said you were going to potentially make the actions available on github.com.
Yes.
Would I be able to have my own actions repo and point pipedream.com to it eventually?
Yeah, we envision, the one of the biggest points of feedback we heard, and actually the top issue on our GitHub repo by upvotes, is I want to serialize workflows as code, hack on workflows locally, keep workflow code in my own Git repo. Actions would be the same. We envision, we're not there yet, right? But the vision is that you should be able to manage Pipedream workflows like you manage any code. So both with workflows and actions, even private actions that you haven't published, those ideally would live in your own repos. Public actions that we publish, we want to contribute. You could put those in the Pipedream GitHub repo, just like our public event sources are. But if you look at the event source documentation, that's kind of where we're headed. So event sources, those are in GitHub. You can keep your own event sources in your own repo private, manage those programmatically via the CLI and API. So all the docs are on event sources. That's essentially the same vision we want to apply to workflows and actions. Everything can be serialized to code. Everything can be kept in Git.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. That was really insightful. I actually learned quite a lot, which was really good. And I think we covered, I can't believe we never had any errors. I'm actually surprised at myself for that. But
yeah, good job. I know.
That's not how my normal Pipedream day-to-day goes. So I make a lot of bugs. But thank you again for taking the time out of your day for joining us today, showing us Pipedream, and have a great day. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, David.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.